Hi, my name's Charlotte Scott and I am sometimes known as the Slightly Made Quilt Lady, and today we're going to talk about freezer paper. Freezer paper is a product that was originally designed for use in wrapping food in freezers, and now quilters have come up with ways to use it for themselves. It's not available on any supermarket shelves that I've seen in New Zealand, but you can buy it in quilt stores and you can buy it online. So freezer paper has a shiny side which has a light plastic coating, and then it has a dull side which is just like normal paper. And what it does is when you iron it with the shiny side down, is that plastic melts just slightly and it sticks to fabric, but it also peels off, and then it can be ironed again and used several times before it loses that stick. So quilters use it for templates and stencils and all sorts of things. So probably one of the first things that quilters started doing is using it for applique. So you can see that you can see through the paper and you can trace your applique shapes onto the dull side of the paper. Now here's my first tip. If you've got multiple stencils to cut out, like you want 3 or 4 of these leaves, you can staple several layers of freezer paper together. You only trace this once and then you can cut out and you get 3 shapes all at once. Then you iron your freezer paper down to the wrong side of your fabric, cut out with 1/4 of an inch, and you have a shape that you can then pin to fabric. And as you stitch, you can, if you're hand appliquing, you can, as you needle turn, you can fold that seam allowance under the paper. You'll need to clip any sharp curves, and that just gives you a hard edge to work to. Here's one I did earlier. I've done it with black thread so that you can see, and then what you do is you just cut a little slit in the back and you pull your little template out, and you've got a beautiful soft applique. You probably just want to iron that shut again, just like that. You can also take this and iron the seam allowance down, pin it to your fabric, and then you could use a little tiny machine zigzag along that edge and pull out your template as before. Some people like to put the dull side of the template, pin it onto fabric, cut around, and then iron the seam allowance onto the shiny side, and so that that seam allowance stays stuck down, so that when they put it on fabric, that seam allowance is already done for them. I would advise using a travel iron rather than a big butty iron like this. You're less likely to burn your fingers. The other thing that freezer paper is really good for using is getting perfect applique circles, because you can use it as a template, and then you do a little running stitch. I don't know if you can see it, a little running stitch in your seam allowance with a really long stitch length with your machine, and you pull your threads and it gathers that seam allowance up perfectly so that you get a really nice circle. I've actually used 2 layers, so I'm going to pop that out. If you're worried about your seam allowance being a little bit floppy, spray it with a little bit of spray starch before you pull out that template, and that'll help give you a really crisp edge. I cut 2 circles out of freezer paper, and then see, they're stuck together really well. I cut 2 circles out. I put my my fabric down, 1 circle with the shiny side down, the next circle with the shiny side down, iron it so I've got 2 layers, so that makes a really nice crisp template. Okay, what else can we use freezer paper for? We can use it for English paper piecing. You cut out your English paper piecing shapes out of freezer paper, you iron them down to the wrong side of your fabric, then you can iron the seam allowance around if you're confident that that will give you a good edge, or you can use a fabric glue stick and just glue your seam allowances around, or you can do the traditional basting with a thread. And then, see, these 2 I've already stitched together, and I've done it with a, so then you can stitch along those edges and I'll put this one here and carry on. So it's like freezer, it's just like normal paper, but ironing it down to the shape stops it from moving when you're putting your seam allowances over. Okay, you can also use it as stabilizing quilt labels. I love this one. I've cut my freezer paper to the exact size of the label that I want. I have drawn lines with a permanent pen or any old pen onto the dull side, ironed it to the reverse side of my fabric, and then I've got lines. If I use it with a light box, I can see those lines and I can write really straight. Then I can iron my seam allowance around the edge of that freezer paper, and I've got a really crisp line to applique to the back of my quilt. You can use it for a stencil for quilting. So here I've cut out a G shape in my freezer paper. I've ironed it to my quilt sandwich, and I have done straight lines up to the edge of my G, and on this side of the G I have machine quilted just around the edge. You can also do this with hand quilting if you've got a shape that you want to hand quilt around. Of course you could do it with that, you don't have to do it with the machine. And then when you pull it off, if you haven't stitched through your freezer paper, you get a beautiful precise shape to work with. No marking. I'm not a fan of marking with those blue pens. I've had accidents with them. They're great in some instances, but if you want something like, something quite precise, you don't have to mark with anything. Your freezer paper comes right off. Okay, you can also use it for stenciling. These are my Shiva paint sticks. They're a solid kind of paint, but you can also do it with liquid paint. I cut out a template here. Here's one that I did earlier, and it's peeled off. It's nice and soft. But here you can see this is the negative of the template. Gives you a positive shape. And here is and with my brush I just brush over the edge. And here is the positive bit of the template, and it gives you the negative shape. So freezer paper is wonderful like that. Now I could wait till my paint's dry, iron it down, and maybe use it once more as well. So aren't they cool? You can use this with a sponge and wetter paint, or a little spray with ink, or anything that you could think of. You can also use it, I use a lot of silk organza in my quilts, and I have ironed Misty Fuse, which is a fusible web, but it doesn't have a paper backing, so I can't use it like traditional paper backed fusible web, draw the shape onto the back of the fusible web. What I do is I iron it with my Teflon sheets onto my organza, and then I iron the freezer paper template. Then I can draw using a ceramic marker around the edge of my shape, or I can just go straight in and cut around the edge of it, like I've already started to do here. But that's a little bit more fiddly for any areas like these fiddly bits. I definitely draw around them because they can peel off, especially if you've used the template more than once. I'll show you here. You can see there where I drew just before. So it gives you a good line. So freezer paper is really good for that kind of stuff. If you're cutting with like little tricky bits around here, either use really good sharp tip point scissors, although these are my fabric ones, I wouldn't use them. Or you can use an X-Acto knife, a little bit like a scalpel, with a cutting mat. Okay, what else can you do with it? You can also, if you're doing a lot of English paper piecing, applique, or labels, you can actually put freezer paper sheets through your printer, an inkjet printer, not a laser, because the laser uses heat and you'll melt your plastic and you'll bung your printer up, and I take absolutely no responsibility for bunged up printers. But you can inkjet onto the dull side and print out a whole sheet of English paper piecing shapes, or you know, templates or something like that. You can also iron it to pieces of fabric to stabilize for running through your printer. Just need to be careful to make sure that you've got no loose threads that are going to get tangled up in your printer. Okay, I think that is probably enough for now, but as you can see, freezer paper has multiple uses. Get stuck into finding out a few for yourself, and I'm Charlotte Scott from the Slightly Mad Quilt Lady. I hope you have a wonderful quilty day.